Yeah.
Okay, everybody. I'm going to start the meeting. I'll let everybody else come on as they come on here. Um, I have a special guest on tonight. This is Dr. Danny Otis. He is a fresh DPHC. He just finished his diplomate in chiropractic philosophy standards just the end of last year. It's been a long drag, and he's been really busy with it. So uh, I met Danny, it was probably 3, 4 years ago on a mission trip. He was the associate of Dr. Lona Cook, and now he's basically branching out on his own, starting his first practice in Frisco, Colorado. So, Dr. Danny, welcome to the Long Island Band of Brothers.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And yeah, thank you just for having me in general. I just think it's truly an honor to just honestly learn alongside everyone here. I think we all have one thing in common, that's we love chiropractic. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my fire and some of what I've learned over the last few years. And really kind of just tell you a little bit of story because I feel like what I'm going to present to you guys about tonight has been kind of like a 6, 7 year journey in the making, if you will, of just constantly revisiting a lot of these topics and then just trying to understand it more. So, I graduated in 2020 from Life West, and it wasn't necessarily a graduation. I was going into my last quarter, and 2 days before the quarter started, everything just stopped. And I was a little upset about it because there was this class which was the philosophy of subluxation, and it was supposed to tie together everything that we've learned throughout school and kind of put a nice bow on it. Because when we go through school, it's very, as you guys know, like compartmentalized. It's like you have histology and biochem and anatomy and philosophy, but it didn't really teach you how to think like a chiropractor because it was all almost separate. So this class was designed to help see the lens of chiropractic when you're talking to a patient, educating them, working with them, and really just assessing them. So I felt like I was a little ripped off with that because we didn't really get the full experience of that. But then,
Danny, I have a quick question for you.
oh yeah,
Dr. Oberstein was the president of Life West, where you were there the whole time, right?
he was, yep, and I love overseeing. He did a great job there. He still checks in. He sends us texts, probably Alex and I, probably about once a month, just checking in and see how we're doing. So he has a great relationship with a lot of the students there. So he was fantastic. Yeah. So, but then fortunately, like Johnny Mac was saying, had great mentorship, and they said if you are done with your clinic requirements, go work in an office and then do your last courses online. So thankfully, I got to go in basically 5 days later. I packed up all my stuff and I ended up in Lona's office. And obviously, you all know Lona, and she's wonderful, but she helped me kind of unlearn this very siloed, medical approach and taught me how to be a real chiropractor, essentially. And I felt like that was the biggest blessing at that time. And then I think the diplomate is what helped sew both of those together because in chiropractic, we obviously have like the physical and the non-physical. And I feel like I got the physical in school, and then I got a great dipping in kind of more the non-physical part with Lona. And then I felt like the diplomat married it together. So, and it was specifically this one weekend where we went over the biological spectrum. And I remember I just had this like aha moment. It's like each presenter after the next, I just felt like each one was just like more and more clear. And just to give you guys some context during this weekend, it wasn't actually the instructors presenting. They assigned everybody as the students to present during this weekend. And everybody had 50 minutes, and it was just names out of a hat, and you got assigned a topic. And you couldn't speak about anything coming after, and you could only speak about what was said before. And you had to speak for 50 minutes. So just to give you some context on like the normal health line up top, it was like internal resistance, external resistance, survival values, health, adaptation, signs of life, coordination, different things like that. And then the upper left is this departure from ease and the vertebral subluxation. And before they picked, in my mind, I'm like, that is the last topic I want, because who am I to sit here and talk about the vertebral subluxation to a bunch of diplomates? And I didn't ended up getting picked. My name didn't get picked out of the hat, and I was a little frustrated. But then fast forward to about 3 days before we're supposed to meet for this weekend, the person who had that topic had a family emergency. Thankfully, everything was okay, but they were unable to make it. And he said, would you like to take this topic and present on it in 2 days, but you can't use any of their stuff because we want it to be your own. So in 2 days, I ended up putting on this presentation on the imbalanced concussion of forces and the vertebral subluxation. So that's actually what I ended up doing my thesis on. So that's what I'm really going to present about here tonight. And it's just kind of this serendipity moment of the last thing I wanted to do and ended up being my favorite thing to talk about now. So, so that's really what we're going to go into here today. And it was cool because we had a list of all the theses from the 20s and on. And there's so many on the vertebral subluxation, but there was zero on the imbalanced concussion of forces. So I felt like it had a little bit of a different lens, even though it's still talking about essentially the same thing, which is dis-ease and the departure from ease, right? And when we talk about the imbalanced concussion of forces, I'm going to go through this. And why I love our philosophy is because it's this deductive reasoning. And I think in school, I didn't fully understand what that meant until I really sat with it. And how the greatest advice that I got when I was in that program is how to actually work through the principles. And it was how each principle builds off the last, and the next one is true because of the one before it. And I always felt like when I went through them before that it almost seemed like I had to take a break and like I'm like, okay, well, let me think about this and how are they connected. So today I'm actually not going to go in order. I'm going to jump around quite a bit. We're going to dance with the principles, but we're going to look at the imbalanced concussion of forces through this almost deductive lens of really three different categories and really four principles, even though I think you could honestly apply all of them to it. So I'm going to start with just cause and effect. Principle 17. Obviously, every cause has its effects and every effect has its causes. And I think if you just even take chiropractic philosophy out of that, I think that's just a good common sense principle for everybody to remember. Like our actions have consequences, both physically and non-physically. So that's one of the things that I started this paper with because I feel like, especially if we're talking about forces, whether it's universal forces, innate forces, this helps us understand the distinction not only between the two, but the types and as well as where and how those effects happen. So I always like to start with that. And then the second really part of that is obviously the character of both universal and innate forces. So universal forces, principle number 11, the forces of universal intelligence are manifested by physical laws, unswerving and unadapted, with no solicitude for the structures in which they work. And I know you all have heard this, but the two things that have really stood out, at least to me, and I think a lot of people always like to say like the no solicitude and they like to break that down. And I think that's an awesome point. But for me, it was manifested by physical laws and then unadapted. And I think those were the two things that helped me have an aha moment of like what makes this separate and distinct from the innate forces, especially when they're coming at the body with this concussion of force. So when we talk about like the physical laws, they're not specific to the body, right? They're the laws of physics, biochem, electricity, magnetism, time, right? All these things that we measure that we learned in school, very compartmentalized. So then I was able to like say, okay, well, this is how you start to apply maybe some of these more diagnostic medical ways of thinking, but you can start to see where our philosophy meets the road when it comes to, again, that second part, which is like the unadapted force. And that kind of leads us into this other part, which is the mission and function of innate intelligence, principles 21 and 23. In principle 21, the mission of innate intelligence is to maintain the material body of a living thing in active organization. So again, if it's like physical laws over here, and then we have active organization of the material body, it's just we're measuring those because these are non-physical things, but the way that we can start to measure them is through the physical mediums in which they operate. And I think that helped make a connection for me because when we're studying it, it almost seems separate, even though it's couldn't be more connected at the same time. And then principle 23 is the function of innate intelligence is to adapt those unadapted universal forces for use in the body so that all parts of the body will have coordinated action for mutual benefit. And again, I think when we see that, you just break it down. It's like unadapted invasive force or potentially invasive force, and then an internal resistive force, and then cause and effect. And I think that starts to set up this lens of this imbalanced concussion of forces, almost this tug of war within the body that's always trying to maintain and adapt. And then another point that I felt really hit home is in Article 118 of the chiropractic textbook, where it goes a little bit more into depth into these innate forces. And it helped clarify it for me even more, which was that innate forces are just universal forces assembled or adapted to for dynamic functional power. It causes the tissue cells to function or offer resistance to the environment. And that kind of came into one of the things that we had to talk about on the biological spectrum, which was like the one cause, one cure. So piece by piece, as I was sitting in this weekend, it just slowly started to come to me a little bit more and a deeper understanding, and it made me fall in love with it even more. So to go over that next, I felt like this is the perfect symbol for kind of that internal and external resistance. And I remember the first time I heard this principle, it almost bothered me because I think one of our philosophy professors, he said, is the chiropractic adjustment or constructive or destructive force? And I'm thinking in my head, because I didn't know any better and I didn't actually take the time to understand it. I'm like, you just told us for the last 2 years in chiropractic school that when you get adjusted, it's good for your body. It's, like all this stuff that we learned. And then to say that it's destructive, I'm like, I didn't fully understand. So I had to go back and work through that again. But then what I realized is if the universal forces are destructive, innate forces are constructive in regards to structural matter, it's like that's what is needed in order to carry out that universal cycle of life. That's the positive and negative, the yin and yang, the masculine, feminine, the light and dark. You can't have one without the other. And both are needed to then perpetuate this constant cycle of life, which is what made me appreciate our principles even more, because when we're sitting in school, again, it's like we think about, it's always about health, but it's never mentioned once in the principles, but life is mentioned continually in almost in every principle. And then it just makes you get this deeper understanding and appreciation for what we do. It's like, it's not even about that. It's about life and beyond. So this was this huge aha moment for me when I started to understand the dynamic nature of these forces. And it really brought like an eye-opening experience in that way. So then when we talk about life, like, again, reading some of Didi's work and going through like the 1910 textbook, he has this one quote where this is even before the chiropractic textbook was published. Life is the result of the combination of intellectual spirit and unintelligible matter. And it's like, if that's not principle number 2, the chiropractic meaning of life before it was ever put into motion, I mean, that hits it. And then he goes right into it by saying chiropractors should become acquainted with that which constitutes function and the expression of life. And I love that quote because then it starts to make me think, okay, like, well, if that's what his vision was for this profession, that we need to start to understand some of these principles, how do we start to weave it into even this concept of the concussion of forces? And he goes on to say, and I'm just going to read a little bit of it, but it's just great to see into his mind on how he thought, because then when it comes to a patient on your table, at least for me, it helps me to start to think on a deeper level on how I can best serve this person in front of me. He says, what is life? Of what does it consist? How does it adapt itself to its environments? What are its properties by which organs or the organism as a whole are maintained? Upon what does the performance of function depend? And he keeps going on and he keeps going through this. And it's just like, okay, this is where I start to see the concussion of forces show up again. And there's 3, and again, you could probably apply all the principles like you can, but there's 3 principles again that I think highlight this on a deeper level as well. And that's principle 8, the function of intelligence is to create force. So if we talk about this universal cycle of life and this universal force that's in all matter, and then we start to see that the function of that intelligence is to create that force, then you go right into principle 10 and it's like, okay, the function of force is then to unite intelligence and matter. And then we start to see previously the triune of life on display again later on in our principles, where in order to have that 100% life, this is what's needed. And the function of those things are very clear and stated. And then I will say principle number 14 is my favorite principle. Force is manifested by motion in all matter. All matter has motion, therefore there is universal life in all matter. And I think, again, that just highlights this beautiful dance that we constantly see, whether it's in our cycles, this cycle in our principles of this life that is beautifully woven into our philosophy. that just makes you appreciate every single time that somebody's on your table. You're like, this is so much bigger than me and them. It's just about like what's bigger than life. It's, I think, in the background of Johnny's picture there, Sid always used to say that, right?
Yeah.
And I just, that for me, it just had like an aha moment. And then it kind of brought it again a little bit deeper into the concussion forces. And I think in school, oops, I think in school it was again presented pretty physically. Obviously, they talked about the three T's, but when you think of like concussion of forces, it's almost like you think of like a car accident, right? Or like a linebacker hitting somebody, like a running back coming up the middle. But when you go into like the definition of concussion and force, concussion is defined as like a disrupting or weakening effect of a collision. And force is strength or energy exerted, cause of motion or change. So when you put those together, it's a disrupting or potentially disrupting, weakening cause of motion. And then that just goes back into that principle number 14, where if there's universal life in all things, because there's motion in all matter, there's universal life and universal intelligence even within the concussion of forces. And I just feel like, again, there's that beautiful dance again with our principles. It's like, it always blows my mind that I will just speak for my generation, that we have such access to technology that I think our generation doesn't necessarily think anymore sometimes. And it's refreshing to know that these people literally just sat around when horse and buggy was the main mode of transportation or train. And they just came up with these deep philosophical concepts. And the amount of admiration for these people that came before us is just astronomical. And then when you start to just see it time and time after again in our principle, how it weaves into everything we do, it's just beautiful. So the next question I asked myself, and then it's just kind of to go off that quote that I read from Heady, is just like, when we start to try and understand this, like we have to ask ourselves questions. So then my question was like, okay, well, where do we see this take place? And the vertimer was also like a word that I had not heard in chiropractic school. I had read it in the chiropractic textbook, but I didn't fully understand it, right? I thought, okay, we learned vertebrae, pedicle, lamina, like all these different things, right? But I love this because again, it kind of brought into this more microscopic view of like how specific our philosophy can be. And it's really the region of the vertebrae and all the tissues that keep the vertebrae in place, right? And when the body is subluxated, that's what can start to prevent innate from being able to hold it where it's supposed to. Like the innate contraction of forces or contracture of forces is like why we don't just subluxate when we're bending, lifting, turning, twisting constantly, is because we have that internal resistive force. And the vertemer is everything that has to do with that, the vertebrae, the intervertebral disc, all these things that we learned in school. And again, it brought back these siloed things back into perspective of like, this is so much bigger than this. And this is also for me where I learned it's like, okay, well, this is where obviously the adjustment takes place as well, where we provide the adjustic thrust and innate uses that and provides that change. So I'm not going to go too in depth on the vertemer cycle just because I know you guys are 2 hours back behind me and I know it's just daylight savings and I don't want to put anybody to sleep because the vertemer cycle I know is pretty long and dry. But my favorite part about it, I'm going to pick out three things. And it's just so cool because again, if we think about the simple cycle and the safety pin cycle, it's like this kind of surface level where almost anybody can understand it. You can use that for patient education. Whereas the vertemer cycle is like looking through all this through a microscope. It's like macro and micro. And that's why I love this because again, it just weaves it together and sews it together piece by piece of like the power of what we do and how specific they were of those who came before us. And what I love about it is it influences the neuromove cycle, the compensation cycle, like all these cycles that we talk about, it's like it all kind of starts here. And when this cycle is not resulted in all that it should be, that's when we start to see these compensations, or really when the tissue cells try to offset or maintain that coordination. And the two spots that really hit home for me, and I think they're all important, but really steps 5 and 6 was like aha for me because it really brought in together like the three T's. And then steps 27 and 28, which I'll get to a little bit later, but steps 5 in this and 6 are like that vibration. And this is where I'm so thankful for my biggest mentor, Dr. Lona, is because this was so much of the conversation day to day in our office was the vibration and the tone of the people that come in, what we put out is what we get, different things like that. And this is where this hit home, is because vibration by definition is the motion of the tissue cell performing its function, right? It's the effect of that invasive concussion of forces on the vertebra. And then one step further is the impression of that vibration, which is the information that is now coded and labeled onto that nerve. So it's like what we perceive. It's like the matrix, and then it just puts it into like a little perception for us to hear, or not hear, but just perceive, right? And I love that because it started to bring it out of, again, that really collision like physical meaning of what we do. And don't get me wrong, that's obviously important, but I think we could agree, and we all see it in our office, that I think a lot of the day to day of what's showing up is a lot of maybe the non physical. It's a lot of the mental emotional stuff, right? And Stevenson was all over this as well. And he said concussions are not all derived from the outside, but internal stresses and strains are of the same major importance as physical accidents. And we know that. And he said this even in the art of the chiropractic right away before he even dove into a lot of the specifics. And then to go back and really bring this to, again, more of the metaphysical part, when he thought about like, where does the thought come from? That's why I love this so much, is because then I got to bring in what I've heard Johnny talk about, obviously, when he does his tone integrity, and Lona, when she always talks about this, like this started to categorize and put labels to a lot of these things that we see show up on our table, that I felt like the chiropractic philosophy, it's not like the survival values and different things weren't explaining that well. I think this just goes even deeper. And I loved it because this is that vibration. This is that perception of people's like reality of, if they're in peace, love, joy, or let's say shame, guilt, and apathy, that's a different vibration. That's a different perception of that vibration on the nervous system that body then now has to adapt to. And I loved this so much that nerdy me put it into a table. And I kind of compared it to like the six main concepts really of like, okay, in the normal complete cycle and the vertebral cycle, where do we see that overlap with a lot of what David Hawkins is talking about in his power versus force in this scale of consciousness? And there's so much beautiful overlap, again, where we can see if our understanding of the chiropractic philosophy is bigger than what it used to be, as far as like your own personal understanding, you can start to apply it to more things. So universal intelligence, again, our main principle is like infinite organizing principle, always perfect, never failing. And that goes perfectly hand in hand with some of the things he talks about with power versus force. When we correspond to the higher fields of power, love, joy, peace, enlightenment, that same thing is infinite, eternal, and undisturbed. And there's so much give and take there with universal intelligence. And then when we go into innate intelligence, it's the individualized proportion. It creates perfect orders. DD always talked about like that higher self within, different things like that. And that's what David Hawkins was saying. And it's like, again, you just start to see how beautiful all of this gets woven in together. And then my favorite one is the creation of mental impulse. And I think this is the thing that distinguishes our profession more than any other profession. And when I started to really dive into the mental impulse, it made me appreciate, again, the precision of how we choose to use our language and how we choose to perpetuate this culture of chiropractic. Because when you start to lose some of those important terminology, you start to lose the identity. It's like, I know Johnny Mack is Irish. I'm very Irish as well. Like every year growing up in St. Paul, we would go march in the St. Patty's Day parade with my whole family. My mom's maiden name is O'Mooney, and we were all there. And it's like, if you change the color of St. Patrick's Day from green to purple, it starts to lose its identity. It doesn't like, it's just not the same. So it made me appreciate the specificity and how they use those words, because then when we look at and apply that to that power versus force, the mental environment starts to color that translation of force, right? It distorts the vibration, whereas power, those higher love states, clarifies it. And that's like if we're able to receive the full mental impulse or if there's interference to it. And it just, again, it brought this concussion of forces together for me on a whole deeper level of understanding. And then essentially the last three, they all kind of say the same thing, but your body is mirroring this vibration and the consciousness filters the reality through which your system interprets it. And for me, that brought together not only the three T's, but it brought together this, external, potentially invasive force, internal resistive force. And then it's like, okay, well, what is my role in this whole thing? Me as a chiropractor, when somebody's on my table, what is my role? And that's where steps 27 and 28 kind of brought it home for me. And it's not that like we're playing God by any means, but it's just like we are there to remove the interference. And when the resistance is unbalanced with those imbalanced concussion forces, that's when we see that departure from ease and the vertebral subluxation is produced. There's a change at the vertebra in form and function. And to my understanding, when I was doing this, this is why the conclusion, at least I came to, is the vertebral subluxation can't fix itself, is because it's changed in form and function of all the things that are supposed to hold it where it's supposed to be, and innate is supposed to use those. So it's almost like when you go out on a lake, the first thing you're supposed to put in is the plug so you don't sink, right? If the form and function of the boat is to float and the intelligence, you on the boat, is to drive it, that's the function. If all of a sudden the plug is out and you have to start going into a compensation and shovel out water, the form and function has changed, therefore it's not able to perform its duties as best of its abilities as it could. Now, with the interference of the vertebrae, that's because that form and function and texture has changed, so the mental impulse is not able to fully express itself in that tissue. So our role is just to get as good as possible, essentially, as analyzing and then producing a educated force so that their innate can adapt to that as good as possible. So let's go to the next one. So that's kind of my journey with this whole topic, and really kind of bird's eye view of a little bit of what I dove into with my thesis. But my final thoughts can kind of bring this whole thing together. It's like in that moment, it's like paused at a moment in time, and there's this split from proper expression of tone, ease, coordination, and therefore health and ultimately life. And since innate is always 100%, it's doing everything that it can in that moment, but it's recruiting through compensations. We know it's still on the job, but the ease, the coordination, the proper tone, and as a result, the adaptability is negatively affected in that organism. And we are being everything that we can without being everything that we could be. And then when I think about that, that's like that big idea that again goes back to this power versus force of like, again, what's our role of this? And Dee always would talk about the moral and religious duty of a chiropractor. And I know you guys have all heard the big idea, so I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but the slip on the snowy sidewalk in the winter is a small thing. A fall from a ladder in the summer is a small thing. But the last three sentences of that, I feel like brought this whole concept home for me, which was the adjustment of the subluxation to release pressure on the nerves, to restore mental impulse flow, to restore health is big enough to rebuild thoughts and actions of the world. The idea that knows cause, that can correct the cause of dis-ease is one of the biggest ideas known. Without it, nations fall. With it, nations rise. The idea is the biggest I know of. And I feel like that was like that journey of going from school of it's very physical, then we kind of get this metaphysical part of chiropractic and how do they all intertwine? And it's just like, that is why we're here, is because when each person starts to contribute to that higher frequency consciousness of society, and this starts to align with our philosophy of innate restoring the individual's nervous system, and when that interference is removed, this helps restore that proper universal cycle of life in that universal harmony. And when we remove that interference, that person obviously is going to experience higher quality of life, health, clarity, emotional balance. But what we don't always see is that big idea, because if we get to these same laws and principles and we start to apply it on a bigger level, that's when that global level of multiple individuals start to come into alignment. They contribute to this idea of this collective consciousness where, because of this universal intelligence in all things, it starts to create this ripple effect where this manifests as the flow of the life force. We get greater awareness, we have higher vibration, and overall increased harmony among our human experience. So that's really kind of my big undertaking with this topic I didn't even want to get assigned to, and then now it's my favorite thing to talk about. So thank you again for just letting me share that. And I appreciate you guys having me out to speak, and hopefully I can make it to New Beginnings soon here. So thank you very much.
I'm going to ask everybody to unmute. Danny, this is an amazing presentation because you basically broke down a lot of the things that confuse a lot of chiropractors. If you haven't read it yet, you need to get Homewood's Neurodynamics of the Human Spine, because he
Right.
dives into the vertebrae deeper than you could even want.
Okay.
It's interesting because we just had this conversation. I was on a call the other day with the council, and the biggest problem we're having is some of the new docs are all coming out of school saying the subluxation doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So that's probably going to be your task as one of the young docs to really explain how bad the subluxation is and how real it is.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask anybody else on the call, give your appreciation. Any questions you have for Danny, please step up.
Danny, I just want to say that that was a really clear presentation of the 33 principles, brought into real life practice. So, and I know that's hard to do because I've read the 33 principles many times and I've been in practice a long time, and sometimes I don't understand the stuff. But yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad I was here tonight to hear you, and I'm very happy that you're a chiropractor and the future of the profession is safe with guys like you. So thanks a lot for
Thank you very much.
doing what
Means a
you
lot.
do.
Thank you.
Hi, Danny.
Hello. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. I just wanted to know if if we just been hit with a mission trip on his call, because that was awesome.
Yes. Yes. Well, you kind of cut out there for a second.
I said I want to know if we were just hit with a mission trip on this call, because that was awesome.
Yeah, we should definitely go on one soon. You're just talking about that with Johnny Mac before. Maybe next year we'll be going on one again. So
I'm just saying that this call was a mission trip.
oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Gary, I'm sure you got stuff to say.
Danny, that was awesome, brother. That was really, really fantastic. And to hear someone talk about the Vermeer cycle is pretty wild. And it really is the portion that explains what we deal with every single day in practice. And that connection between innate brain and tissue. And when a subluxation exists, that interference affecting the tissue by preventing innate to keep the vertebrae, the whole thing in place, in situ, as they say. And this is the crux of what we get to do every day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great to hear you put that all together and connect it for everybody. So good stuff, man. Really enjoyed it. Nice job.
Thank you.
Jeff, Barbara, Joanne.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you, Danny.
Thanks,
This is
Danny.
Joe.
Who's going?
Hi, this is Joe Badilli. 40 years in practice, and you explain Vermeer to the T. She's so beautiful, and thank you. Just taught me a few different things that I didn't know after 40 years either. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And very passionate, inspiring, and feel encouraged that our younger doctors are getting the big idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I was on my way back on a 4-hour drive from Pittsburgh after speaking out there this weekend, and that's when your brain really tries to find things to think about. And I always overthink things to some degree, but I kind of went back to the quote by Mark Twain that the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you figure out why. And part of my talk out there was, what we're actually doing and why and how it has such a great effect on humanity. And our philosophy is that why of not just why we as chiropractors do what we do, but how we fit into the big picture of the universe and human existence and the whole grand plan of whatever it was that was designed. And it's such a bigger purpose and bigger picture than we realize sometimes. And a lot of what you talked about, brings that all full circle back into perspective. And you've got really good insights there. And I appreciate you. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you as well.
Barbara, Tony, anybody else want to say anything?
Danny, I want to say something here. Rick Statler. I just want to say what you presented was so amazing. Yet there's a piece here of the fact that if you look across the board of who's watching tonight, most of us are considered the old guard. and, you know, the elders. And it is so important to pass that torch and for that next generation to ignite the flame and the fire and fuel, you know, those who are going to come after us. And I'm so glad to see someone like you, you know, getting out there with this message, carrying that torch, and hopefully lighting a few asses on fire.
Yeah, that's the goal. Yeah. Our diplomate class was exactly, I think, 100 years after Clarence Gonstead and Henry Barge graduated. So they nicknamed our diplomate class the Crusader Class 2.0. And they said that we got a mission to do, and that's exactly it, to light some asses on fire. So thank you. I'm glad you caught some of that fire as well.
Danny, I want to wish you and Alex all the best. Good luck on the practice. Keep posting everything else. I'll follow you on Instagram. I hope to see you on a mission trip. Definitely when you can, get out to New Beginnings.
Yes.
Bring your fiance
Hopefully
and
this fall.
your new wife with you.
Yep.
Anybody else have anything else they'd like to say before I close the meeting? All righty. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done, Danny.
Good
Thank you,
night.
guys.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Danny. Night.